Afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here today. It's been great to be joined by our great Justice Minister, Paul Goldsmith, and also with Mark Mitchell, our awesome Police Minister as well. As you well know, restoring law and order has been one of the key priorities of our government, and it's quite simply because we want Kiwis to feel safer and to be safer in this country. Just 2 short years ago, just over 24 months ago, we were dealing with a massive increase in violent crime, up 30%. We dealt with daily ram raids, if you remember, sometimes 1 or 2 a day, and we dealt with visible gangs that actually were less than 1% of the population, but contributing almost 1/5 of the serious violent crime that was taking place in this country. It's pretty obvious that Labor's soft on crime approach was not working, and as a result, as a new government, we became very clear about the problem we're trying to solve. We've put in place a very common sense plan in order to deliver better results, and ultimately with the goal of keeping New Zealanders safer and feeling safer. I'm very proud of what we've done in just 2 short years. If you think about it, we scrapped Labor's prison reduction target, saying lowering prisoners isn't the goal, lowering crime is the goal of what we're here to do. We've banned the gang patches in public and given police more powers to go after gangs. We've toughened up sentencing on a range of areas, and we've given police more powers. And that just means that we are all in about restoring law and order so that Kiwis feel safer. And that's why we also set ourselves some pretty ambitious targets at the beginning as well. We wanted to see 20,000 fewer victims of serious violent crime in this country. We wanted to see a 15% reduction in serious youth offending. And the good news is that we are tracking well ahead of those targets. There is a lot more for us to do, but we take tremendous encouragement that when we look at the latest statistics, we can see that there have actually been 49,000 fewer victims of serious violent crime. We've actually seen a 22% drop in youth offending. One of the things about being tough on crime is also you've got to back the police, and we've given the police more powers, and also they've become much more visible. And so we've seen a doubling of the police out on the beat, which has been fantastic. We've actually got 12 beat teams now all across the country. Just this week we started up our new one in Hamilton, and that's going to be great for Hamilton City as well. So there is a lot more for us to do, but we should be very encouraged that having dealt with the problem that we saw coming in on law and order, having put together a very simple but common sense plan, we are delivering better results, and as a consequence, Kiwis are safer in their homes, their businesses and communities, and that's a really key requirement for a society like New Zealand. I'm going to pass off to Paul Goldsmith. We'll come back for questions, and particularly we'll focus on law and order related, and then we can get to issues of the day after that as well. So, Paul.
Oh, thank you, Prime Minister. Yes, look, we had a very simple change 2 years ago when this government came into place, which was shifting away from a focus on reducing the prison population, irrespective of what was happening in our community and on our streets, which was the previous government's focus, to a reduction in the number of victims of crime. And that's why we're so pleased to see the progress made. That's 49,000 families that don't have to go through the trauma of being victims of crime and all the pain and suffering that creates. Now, we're very conscious of the fact, of course, there's still too many victims of crime, still 130,000, and so we get up every day as a government, but also as a broader justice sector. We get up every day to drive that number down and focus on having fewer families' lives turned upside down by violent crime. And we started off with a basic premise, being very clear about accountability, restoring real consequences for crime. We're not into the business of it's not really your fault, it's society's fault, it's somebody else's fault. Actually, people need to be accountable for their actions. So we restored real consequences for crime through tougher sentencing and also many other pieces of legislation which have strengthened the response that society is bringing. And so we're very positive about progress, but conscious that there's much more work to do. So we're happy to answer any questions.
Happy to take any questions around the stats or law and order in general. And then,
Prime Minister, you're calling this fantastic progress, but that's still 136,000 New Zealanders who were still victims of violent crime this year. What does genuine success look like?
Well, any victim of a serious violent crime is unacceptable, and that's why we're just relentless about there is so much more work for us to do. What we're encouraged about is our approach is working, and so to see some progress on 49,000 individuals and families that are not being impacted by trauma and the effects of violent crime on them and their family is a good thing. plan, but we fully acknowledge, as you just heard from the Minister and myself, that, we just think, there's 135,000 other victims that we now need to continue to work on, and this is why we're on the right path. We have the right plan. What we are doing is working, but we want to continue to do exactly what we're doing.
What percentage of New Zealand adults have experienced violent crime in the last year?
I can't talk to that number off the top of my head, but it's
Well,
100.
you can work on our maths, but in terms of 135,000 out of a population of 5 million is what is that, about 3 or 4%? I think 10% would be 500,000, so it's still a significant number, and we want to have fewer people in that situation. It's all about being consistent, and there's much more work we're doing. We've shifted our focus to retail crime as well, giving the police extra tools to deal in that space, so much more to do.
I think that's the big picture here, is that we have learnt in the 24 months what is working. So just talking with our beat teams here, and Mark, Paul and I, we've gone out with these beat teams and been out with them, even 2 years ago, a year ago, and again today, so, talking with them. That the high visibility of our police in our CBD areas in our cities is actually is playing real dividends. There was a big retailer here that has said they've had half the number of retail crime events in this last month versus what they had the same month last year. That is just a function of the police being highly visible. As I said, we've doubled the police presence across the country. The public appreciate it, the shopkeepers, the business owners appreciate it, visitors appreciate it to our country as well. So, we know there's a lot more for us to do, but if you think about, we were dealing with a 30% growth in violent crime. We were dealing with a huge growth in gang membership. We were dealing with ram raids that had quadrupled. We were dealing with a doubling of retail crime. And what was the answer? The answer wasn't to carry on and say everything's going, just to let that continue. We needed to make an intervention. We need to be very ruthlessly clear about what we're there to do, what problem we're trying to solve. And I think that's what you've seen with the plan that we've got. So I fully acknowledge more to do. Any victim of crime, every New Zealander deserves the right to feel safe in their home, their business, their community. But what we're doing is working. We just need more of it.
The number of gang members now outstrips the number of cops in New Zealand. What's your response to that?
Well, again, as we could see in the data, they're about 1/4% of the population, and yet they're responsible for anywhere from 20 to 25% of the serious violent crime. There's no doubt about it. The gang patch ban and other powers and actions by the police have actually made gangs much less visible in New Zealand, and actually you're seeing it in a lessening of violent, serious crime across the country. So we think our stance on the gangs is the right thing. I had political opposition, essentially telling me they're like a Lions or a Rotary. They are not like that. They were causing huge amounts of pain and suffering in our community, and continue to do so, and that's why we'll continue to be very tough on them.
So just really quickly in relation to that is that the gangs are going to continue to try and recruit. That's not going to change. The good news is that the rate of people joining the gangs has reduced significantly under this government, and that is because it is becoming less attractive, and it is becoming much harder to be a gang member in this country. And I want to acknowledge the police, who quite simply have been outstanding in running big operations against the gangs. I think most of the leadership of the Comancheros are in prison. They're going to keep, if you look at Opotiki with the mongrel mob barbarians who are responsible for a lot of the methamphetamine and drug dealing down there, massive operation to clean them up. And I could name another half dozen around the country. And we've got several gang disruption units standing up now. They've been very effective. So my answer to that is, and I think the public feel this as well, is that our police are controlling the streets, not the gangs.
Prime Minister, you made a promise in the election leaders debate that the number of gang members wouldn't outstrip the number of cops. So what has gone wrong with that figure?
Well, I'll just say to you, what we're interested in is lower levels of crime, and I think you've got to acknowledge, 49,000 fewer victims of serious violent crime is a good move in the right direction. More to do, but our stance with the gangs of being tough on gangs, I make no apologies for. We can continue to do more, and you're seeing that with the gang disruption units that have continued to grow. You're seeing it here in the data here, when they were responsible for 20 to 25% of all the serious violent crime, the bashings, the homicides, the murders, all of that stuff going down through the gang activity. Us having a different stance with them is really important, and that's what it's about. It's actually about reducing crime and actually getting the violent crime down, getting youth offending down, tougher sentencing for sure. So yes, we have more prisoners in our prison system, but actually we want to see less. But we only want to see less if there's less crime, and that's exactly what we're doing. We're focusing on crime and not what we were saying before. And when you look forward and you see, Te Pāti Māori that wants to abolish prisons, and you want to see a Green Party that wants to defund the police, and you actually had a Labour Party that wants to have 30% reduction in the prison population and wants to repeal the gang patch ban. I tell you, soft on crime, like we've seen under Labour in the past, is not the way forward.
Just on the move-on orders,
Yeah.
Auckland City Commissioner Helen Robinson just spoke to Auckland Council, and she told them that the proposal is not only ineffective, all it is going to do is cause harm to that individual. It's going to create an incredible drag on our court and prison system and divert precious police time. What would you say to that?
Well, disagree completely. What we're doing here is giving police the tools to deal with disruptive and antisocial behaviour in our CBD. And it's one tool that they have, and the move-on powers may be relevant in some situations, but our police are also deeply, deeply connected into the social service organisations that are working, say, for example, here in Auckland CBD. Our beat teams are, and as a result, and our prevention teams, and as a result, each situation is different, but our police will have the right response to make sure that they can access and exercise a move-on order for someone who's being incredibly disruptive, threatening and intimidating, blocking an access into a shop, abusing people on the streets. We need to make sure it is safe and actually people feel encouraged to come into the Auckland CBD, and that has been improving over the last year, but there's more to do, and it's an obvious tool set for our police to have on the ground.
Is rough sleeping and begging inherently antisocial?
Well, again, as I said, there's a series of things that we're addressing there, and we're giving the police the tools to say if move-on order and an ability to activate that is important, they can use it. But equally, each individual circumstance is actually very complicated and complex, and the police will make the assessment as to whether they exercise the move-on order or whether they plug the person into a social service. But it has to change. We want our families, our visitors, the public to feel incredibly safe to be able to come into the city, not to be abused, not to be threatened, not to be intimidated, and that's what the move-on orders are about.
So I just want to respond to that too, because the City Mission has been an important part of the stakeholder group that we've been working together now for 2 years, and that includes police, local council, government agencies, social service providers, Mary Warden, CPNZ, everyone has resident ratepayers group, Heart of the City. Everyone has come together and we've worked together to identify what are the issues to make the Auckland CBD one of the safest cities in the world, and the gateway for our visitors when they arrive. And City Mission has been a part of that. But the reality is this. They had the same briefing that I got from St John's to say that people, rough sleepers, are at risk. They get targeted. It is not safe for them. City Mission do some great work. They've been there for a long time. They were there when I was a young beat cop in the CBD here. But they have not been able to fix that problem. And so we are bringing some tools in for the police to be able to fix that problem, and we want to take a social investment approach to this. We want to get these people, most of them have got accommodation they can go to. They're making a decision themselves to come and live on the streets. That is not safe. It's antisocial. It intimidates people. People urinate and defecate in areas that members of the public have access to. And I don't think any fair-minded Kiwi thinks that it's good for us as a country to have people think they can set up and live on our streets, right? There has been a gap in the tools that we can use to be able to get those people the help they need, to be able to get them to engage with services so they can actually get the help that they need, and for us as a country to say, no, we're not going to have people living on the streets anymore. They're in danger themselves, they do get targeted, and they create a whole lot of antisocial behaviour and behaviour that scares residents, it upsets shopkeepers and those people that are trying to come in and use our CBDs.
Prime Minister,
Sorry, Helen.
Prime Minister, you've attributed these numbers today to tougher sentencing laws and increased police visibility. Do you have any data to back this up?
Well, we've had a doubling of police, as we've just said, in our beat teams across the country. That's been really good. We've got 12 beat teams up and running. We've had a big focus on gang disruption units to go after gangs hard. You've seen us pass a number of laws around whether it's stalking, harassment, trespassing, 3 strikes. That we've toughened up our sentencing environment. So we know that our actions and our plans are working. And let's be clear, the counterfactual was that it wasn't working. Yet we had a 30% growth in violent crime. We had a quadrupling of ram raids. We had a doubling of retail crime. And so, we used to, 2 years ago, we would have been having this press conference in a superette or in a dairy that had actually been ram raided. And many of you were actually there over that period of time. And we don't do that so often anymore. So the stats are showing us that there is good progress. And as I said, we pulled out 2 that we set as a goal in our 9 better public service targets: reduction in violent crime, reduction in youth offending. And it's good to see that we're moving in the right direction. But fully admit, more for us to do.
The Ministry of Justice, though, only looks at the numbers. Where are you pulling these attributions from?
I'll let Mr. Goldsmith.
Well, yeah, look, the justice sector is a very complex organism, but all we can do is say, well, look, let's have a clear target. And what is the target? It's not about reducing the prison population. It's not about anything other than having fewer victims of violent crime. And we've been doing a whole lot of things since we came in around sending a clearer message, around accountability, giving the police the extra tools to deal with it, and backing that up, backing the police, backing the justice sector to do the job, and we're heading in the right direction. Now, we draw the conclusion from that is that the overall policy mix and the signals that we're sending as a government are heading us in the right direction, and we're going to keep going in that direction.
Prime Minister,
yes.
Tough on crime. Are you as committed to being as tough on child poverty?
Yes, we are, and I saw initial stats, I think, came out just before 11 o'clock this morning. I haven't had a chance to read the full report. My cursory glance was they looked fairly stable, and no New Zealander wants to see child poverty in our country, and clearly it's been a very difficult and challenging time with our economy, dealing with the impacts of high inflation, and that's why we're working incredibly hard as a government to actually grow our economy, which is the way in which we can ultimately address and deal with the effects of child poverty. But basically, my initial top line cursory was it's stable, but frankly, that's not good enough, and there's more to do.
You don't agree with assessments that looking a bit longer has got worse?
I haven't had a chance to read the report. It only came out an hour and a half or 2 hours ago. But all I'm saying is, in my first initial blush, it looks like it's pretty stable. But even then, I'm just not wanting to accept that that's a good outcome at all. We want to see a reduction in child poverty. But I also have to acknowledge it's been an incredibly difficult time, and that's why I've said repeatedly, if you care about low and middle income working New Zealanders, and low income New Zealanders in particular, you have to run this economy well, because when you don't and you create high inflation, this is the consequence. Families do it tough and really hard, and they take the real pain and suffering. And so if you care about working New Zealanders and you care about issues like child poverty, you've got to focus on running an economy well so that you can actually get it growing again, so that actually people have more opportunity to move forward.
Well, Prime Minister, more children are now living in material hardship today since when you came into office in 2023. How has this been allowed to happen?
Well, because of high inflation. When high inflation and the cost of everything goes up in the way that it has, and it's still very difficult for many families in New Zealand. And that's why we've worked so hard over the last 24 months or so to make sure that we get the economy fixed, get the spending down, get inflation down, get interest rates down, get the economy growing, so that we can actually get people into jobs. When people have jobs and families have jobs, that's what actually lifts them out of poverty and is a good thing for them. So that's what we've got to continue to do. I'm just freely admitting that it's been a very difficult time in a high inflation environment. That is the consequence, that it ends up impacting and hurting low-income New Zealanders, and that is why, if you care about them, you run the economy well, because the consequences of what we've seen of not running the economy well, of creating unprecedented high levels of inflation that have caused huge amounts of suffering for New Zealanders. They're still doing it tough. We are starting to come into the recovery, which is good news, but our focus, and that's why I've been relentlessly focused on trying to get this economy sorted and growing, because that's what's going to create the opportunity for people who are in poverty.
The Children's Commission believes the cost of food is driving up material hardship rates. Can you commit to urgent work to bring down these costs for families?
Well, as I've said to you, as a government, in 24 months, the food prices were up 12.5% under Chris Hipkins and Labour. That's the reality of it. Inflation was running at 7.3%. Under our government, in 24 months, we've pulled that down to 3.1% inflation and 4.6% on food price inflation. I know it's still difficult. The rate of the food of increases of goods in New Zealand is slowing. That's inflation, as we say, is back within the band, but it is still a really difficult time for New Zealanders. And the way to deal with that is to manage inflation, keep it in the band, and keep it in check as we're doing. But equally, we have to grow the economy, because when people actually get wage increases that are greater than the costs of things going up, that's how they actually get ahead and become wealthier. I'm pleased that since we've become government, our wage increases have been greater than the impact than the increases in inflation, but people still struggle because we had several years of very high levels of inflation, and the cost of things are expensive, and so we know there's more work for us to do, but the way we deal with that is to grow the economy.
Back on the move on order, sorry.
Yes.
The city mission says that when a instead it'll be legally asking to become a place of refuge. Would you be okay with that happening?
Look, I'm just saying to you, move on orders is a tool that we're going to give our police. I trust our police. Many of you over a year and a bit questioned whether we could action a gang patch ban, and you asked us time and time and time. In fact, every day, you as media would come to us and say, how are you going to operationalise a gang patch ban? It's no different here. By the time the legislation is in place, our police will have good protocols. Each individual circumstance is different. In some cases, activating a move on order will be necessary for the situation that they're encountering. But equally, our police are very connected to our social service organisations on a daily basis here in the CBD on the front line, and they will work with them to plug people into the services they need. So, we are very confident that our police will be able to operationalise move on orders incredibly well, and it's a tool that's needed to deal with the challenges that we've got in our CBDs and our cities. And we've made good progress in Auckland over the last 2 years. We've seen a 38% lessening of victimisations. If you think about the impact of our Housing First commitment that we made just 3 or 4 months ago, we've opened up 300 more places. We've placed 146 people off the streets into housing, up from 33 when we started that program. That's a good improvement. There's more for us to do for sure, but actually we need to be able to get our hands around each of those individual cases, and they're all different and they've all got very complex needs. And I appreciate the opposition coming at us, but the opposition had a 37% growth in homelessness when they were in charge. They spent $1 billion on emergency housing, and we've made housing more affordable. We've got rents coming down. We've taken 7,000 people off a state house social housing wait list. We've taken families and kids out of emergency housing and put them into proper housing. And we've made a big investment around homelessness with more Housing First places, $10 million for rough sleepers, $500 million spent on homelessness exactly, and $5 billion spent on housing assistance in general. So, we've got the resources in, but we now need to deal with the individual cases.
What's Air New Zealand's problem? Why aren't they making money?
Look, I won't comment on that. That's up for an individual company to talk to their own issues, and I think it would be inappropriate for me to do so.
But David Seymour has raised the prospect of selling off Air New Zealand. Is that ever something that you'd consider?
We've said we will have no asset sales this term, as you well know. Yeah.
We also blasted them for focusing on woke issues like electric planes instead of cheaper fares and punctuality. What do you think of that?
It's a company. It needs to respond to itself. It's not appropriate for me as Prime Minister to comment on it.
Did you start that culture that he's talking about, though?
I think you can go look at my track record running in New Zealand. It was pretty good.
They just show that gang numbers are up 13% and are at record highs. Is that a broken promise to New Zealanders?
Well, I can tell you what is our commitment is that we are lowering crime. And when you see violent, serious crime coming down, and that is because gang members, we are tougher on gang members for sure, the effectiveness of gang members in prosecuting crime has been diminished by virtue of our actions. That is a good thing. And I just think, I just ask you to stop and think. We have 49,000 fewer victims of serious violent crime. That is 49,000 individuals and families going through the trauma and the dislocation and the huge disruption that causes them personally. That is a good thing. We know it's not good enough. We know there's a lot more for us to do. But I just think you need to be focusing on the results, which are lower levels of crime. And we promised the New Zealand people we would restore law and order. We said we would be tough on crime, and that is exactly what we have done. And it's actually working because we're heading in the right direction.
Ministry of Justice numbers show the number of people convicted of violent offending last year was the highest since 2017 and has been increasing. Are you cherry-picking the stats? Are conviction stats more reliable than a victim survey?
No, look, I can answer that. There is a range of stats across the justice sector. This crime and victim survey has long been regarded as the best one to give an overall picture of what's going on, because obviously not every crime is reported, but crimes are experienced. And so this is a survey, broad survey across the community, and that's been the one that we've used to track, and previous governments have used to track progress. The fact that there's been more people convicted shows that we're obviously much more vigorous in terms of holding people to account. Of course, if you want to reduce the number of victims of crime, an obvious place to start is with that very small group of New Zealanders who create multiple victims over and over and over again, which is why we've had a real focus on toughening legislation.
Prime Minister.
Meeting Matt a couple of days ago when you were speaking, you said it was concerning and you were a strong advocate of stronger laws. So what are you doing?
Yeah, look, I mean, I actually have launched a new cybersecurity policy and strategy with our cabinet, which we signed off actually last week or earlier this week. And it's entirely appropriate that we look at our whole settings because we need to make sure we've got tougher cybersecurity and around our critical infrastructure in New Zealand. There have been incidents overseas, and also now we're seeing here in New Zealand where we want to see much more better protection. And that is also a message very strongly to businesses, though, as well, which is that the Kiwi laid-backness in a cybersecurity world where there are real risks and challenges is not good enough. You need to be investing and making sure that your systems and your protocols are up to speed and that are actually on point, and they continually evolve given the threats that we see. So, I've talked to a number of different key critical infrastructure providers across New Zealand. We're releasing a discussion, or there'll be a consultation process over the next few weeks and months, and we really want to get much clearer on managing our critical infrastructure. But I'm also sending a message back to businesses that we expect you to do your bit to make sure your systems are safe and that you're protecting people's personal data. And we will look at a whole bunch of incentives and also punishments to deal with that too.
Do you think that MPs should have a travel budget cap and be required to take a cheaper flight option rather than always taking Air New Zealand?
Look, again, a lot of the entitlements around MPs and parliamentarians is all set by an independent remuneration authority. That's what you want to see. So, I don't get to make those decisions, and I shouldn't. It's important that it is held by an independent authority that actually can make those decisions away from politicians making those decisions.
But do you think it should be done?
Well, again, as I said to you, I believe in an independent remuneration authority that sets terms and conditions for parliamentarians. They are the best place to judge it and to use the data analysis and market analysis they've got to make those calls and those decisions. That's not something, you do not want politicians involved in setting their terms and conditions, and I think that's entirely appropriate. It's been a good convention in New Zealand over a number of governments, and I think it's important that we continue to maintain that.
Just dog attacks, are councils doing enough on it, or do you think there needs to be proper legislation change?
No, there's more that councils need to do. Some councils are managing it well, some aren't managing it well, and what we have seen is really horrific. I mean, the case in Northland with the woman that was killed. I mean, all Kiwis' hearts go out to that family because that was an unacceptable situation. That shouldn't be happening in New Zealand. We read about this, we experience, we see it ourselves when we're travelling in developing countries. It's happening in many communities across New Zealand. So my first expectations is councils have powers today that they need to be fully enforcing and fully executing. The second thing is I met in person with the President and Vice President of Local Government New Zealand and said I want all mayors to understand the importance of what we expect them to do. Thirdly, our Local Government Minister has asked for advice on what more could we be doing at a central government level, and if there's more that we can do, absolutely, we are here to help give councils even more powers if that's what they need to be able to get to deal with the scourge of roaming dogs in certain places, and I know Simon Watts is giving us that advice very shortly.
Prime Minister, sorry, one more. We've touched on MPs travelling and also Air New Zealand. Would you be fine travelling Jetstar?
I have. As you know,
Fine with it?
I travelled Jetstar the other couple of weeks ago.
And last one, Pacifica people saw the highest demographic with children in poverty. Your message to them?
Well, again, we are working really hard to get our economy growing, because if we can get a growing economy, we create jobs, and when we create jobs, that's the pathway for people out of poverty. And so this is a government that is, it is a function of when you do not run an economy well and you create high inflation, as the last government did. That is what makes it really difficult for low-income working New Zealanders, and that is something that our government is fixated on. We have to grow our economy, and that's what we've been working so hard to do from day one. Okay, team, thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.